Thank you. Okay, so I'll start sharing the screen. Let's start. Um, okay, so hi everyone. First of all, thank you so much for coming, and I can't wait to tell you about open source because I know it's an intimidating topic and it shouldn't be. So I'm here in the hopes of making it less of an intimidating topic. So as Ellen said, I'm a software engineer. I work at Globality. I'm also an admin for anitb.org open source. And I also mentor for at Black Coder Bootcamp and a Portuguese organization called As Raparigas de Código. And I have been involved with open source since 2017, maybe 2016, because I already knew about the topic, but I wasn't comfortable contributing in any way. And I did apply at the time at Google Summer of Code and I was rejected. And I just didn't know what to do next. So eventually, I got started in a program called 24 Pull Requests, where I did my first contribution to open source. It was a very simple one. I changed the file, a markdown file, and I added the new resource to find jobs, a jobs hunt platform that wasn't in a repository that was all about searching for jobs. After that, I got into Google Summer of Code and I became a student in that program. And after that, I continued in the community I was in, and it to be open source. And I eventually became an admin, which is what I do now there. Yes, and that's my journey. And what I want to tell today is everything I have accumulated in terms of knowledge to try to make this easier for the person who listens to me. So first, let's talk about contributing to open source. What does this mean? So when I think about contributing to open source, first thing, open source projects. These are usually projects that their source code is available, it's public, you can see it, whether it's on GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, you can see the source code. But more than that, contributing to open source, it's all about collaboration between people. And that's why I have this illustration here. It's not just about code, it's about people collaborating to achieving something great in a project. And that's what I want everyone to know here. I will show now an example just to, right off the bat, I want to show you an example of a contribution to open source and, for you to see how simple it can be from different ranges. So I was one day learning about Scala in this website called scalaexercises.org. And I was doing a specific section about functional programming in Scala. And I noticed there was a little typo, this typo. It was saying pipe, it was saying slash instead of saying pipe. And I looked at the rest of the page, and there was a button saying edit on GitHub because the project is open source. So I looked it up, I found it, and then I created the pull request. I just changed the slash for pipe for the content to be correct, right? And to not confuse anyone. And eventually this got accepted. One of the maintainers think from my time and merged. And now the symbol appears correctly. And that was my contribution. This wasn't my first and nor the last, but it's a contribution that I hope you can see how I contributed a little bit with code / documentation. But basically, the next person who looks at this page of the website about property-based testing will not get confused with the symbols. So what I will be talking today about will be about, I will try to deep dive on finding projects and issues, ways to contribute, motivation, because it's kind of important considering that who contributes to open source, most of the time, it's all volunteer, with a few exceptions, right? For people who work for organizations in which their projects are open source. Some things to be aware, you don't have to have everything in your mind today, but it's just, next time you'll spot these, you'll understand, oh yes, I heard in that talk. And a demo of a contribution. So about finding projects and issues. every time people ask me about how do I find a project, this is usually what I say. First, is there a project that you work on or your project depends upon that is open source? Perhaps you found a bug, or perhaps you tried to set up the project and you notice that the setup instructions are made for Mac and you're using a Windows, and you could add setup instructions for Windows, right? So if you think about projects that you already use and you know are open source, think about them. Um, Another example, there's organizations and communities. And what I mean by this is usually organizations that have a common mission, and then they might have multiple projects that support the main mission of the organization. And if you go with the communities approach, uh, you can learn from well-established processes, perhaps, right? Because usually these organizations work the same way in multiple projects. You'll have a common context and be able to contribute better, or perhaps escalate better in the way you start contributing small, and then you can grow from there. Or you can also, on GitHub, search for topics, explore projects by topics. For example, I want a project with Python or with JavaScript. You can use the search functionality for that. So I want to give an example of projects just so you know the types of projects that are out there. I remember last year when COVID started, um, there was a volunteer form that World Health Organization, the organization on GitHub, they had this form for people to volunteer to contribute to their open source project. That's an example. Flutter or React Native, these technologies are open source. Um, Dev is a blogging platform, and the code base, it's open source, and it's in Ruby on Rails, if I'm not mistaken. You can freely see that on GitHub. Fast API, it's a micro framework similar to Flask in Python. Awesome, this thing here in the right side, the goggles, basically. Um, these are usually projects, for example, Awesome Python. If you search this on Google, you'll see a project that has a bunch of resources on Python. And it's just markdown files, right? It's just content for you to read, basically. Python is open source. I want to say that not every project it's directly contributed through, GitHub. For example, Android is open source, like the operating system, but it's not on GitHub. It's elsewhere, hosted by Google, and I have no idea what the process of contributing to that is, but it is open source. You can see the source code, actually, because I searched one day for that. Python is open source. You can see all the pull requests that get merged into CPython, and you can see discussions about it. IFME is a platform of a community that cares about mental health. Visual Studio Code is a code editor. Ruby for Good is a community that does projects for nonprofits and uses Ruby on Rails. Zulip, a communication platform that we actually use at need to be open source. We used Slack before, and now we use Zulip. This is completely open source. And that's just a few examples. And React CLI is SVG component library. Initiatives. So aside from, now you know the multiple types of projects you can find out there, not all involve code. In terms of initiatives, this is how I started with 24 pull requests. And then I went into Google Summer of Code. But actually, I was trying to apply to Outreachy, and then they led me to Google Summer of Code because I was a student. It's important to know that these initiatives function differently. For example, Season of Dogs is for technical writers. There you go. It's not just about code. Google Summer of Code, usually the participants are students. Students get paired with organizations which have admins and mentors and work throughout the summer. Google actually pays a stipend to students. Outreach is similar to Google Summer of Code, but the audience of the participants, it doesn't matter if you're studying in a college, university, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be a student. You need to be from an underrepresented group in tech. And there's also Oktoberfest and Major League Hacking Fellowship. So there's a bunch of initiatives there. If this makes easier for you to contribute. 24 pull requests sure did. I found a project with Markdown and I thought, I will start now. I will start now here. So now about finding issues. Now you know the project. What can you do? You can look into the issues tab. You can see the roadmap of the project. Perhaps maintainers already have a list of the priorities for the project. In terms of issues, look for first timers only or good first issue if you want to start really small and maybe be directed to issues that can be a little bit easier, or at least reserved for new people to the repository. You can come up with your own issues, and I will show you an example of when I did that. Imagine you find a bug, and the bug is not yet reported. Report the bug. That's an open source contribution right there. If you want to go a step over, you can try to solve it. You can also do documentation improvements, just as I said. Perhaps the project you're trying to set up does have instructions for Windows, but it's missing a very important part. For example, exporting an environment variable. And this could break the experience of a newcomer, a complete beginner in open source for that specific repo. You can also review PRs. This is not exactly coming up with issues, but this is something you can totally do to help an open source project. And I want to dive deeper into ways to contribute. I already hammered a lot into, it's not about code, it's not just about code. So I want to tell you, you can contribute as a technical writer, developer, project manager, designer, QA tester, advocate. What I'm doing right now, I'm being an advocate for open source and trying to educate others that you can also contribute and there's a place for everyone in open source. So this is me doing advocacy work, for example. In the project I worked in Google Summer of Code, I developed, the project. That was my main focus. However, I also tested it. I wrote documentation for it. I managed a few contributions and I helped people contribute to it. Those were my main contributions there. I even did the design, not the best, but what was needed for the project at the time. And you can also contribute as an interested person. And I'll show you an example of that. You have different perspectives. I'll show you. So first, coding, it's usually those types of contributions that are the most obvious. I just wanted to mention at least once. There was a bug in one of the projects I maintain, and someone fixed that bug for us. Design. We have some people very interested in design in our community, and one of the designers added this illustration to one of our projects. This also happens sometimes. Someone just contributed with a logo to a CLI tool by command line tool that doesn't have a user interface, but it doesn't matter. They added a logo. They contributed with a logo. It adds to the brand of the project. Documentation, of course. During the Google Summer of Code, I wrote some documentation about, for example, the code organization so that newcomers could know at first, okay, how is this structured, the project? I also did this. I'm not a QA tester, but I wanted people to help me test the REST API that I developed. So I created these little tables just to give an idea. If you use this API, this is a successful outcome, and this is what gives a failure, for example. And now we have a document for all of that, and anyone can contribute to that. You just have to get to know a little bit the API. Another example, our projects, we're now trying to migrate the documentation from GitHub Wiki to DocuServe. So this is all version controlled with Git. Because on GitHub Wiki, only people with write access can change. But in this case, all of this text, it's now together with the source code of the project. So anyone can submit a pull request to add new pages, if makes sense, or fix typos or any of that. Quality assurance. This is a bug being reported. We have a bug template, a bug report template that people can use if they find a bug. And this was someone who, in this case, it's not completely a bug, but it's something that could be improved. In this case, the Swagger documentation, the documentation for the API was missing one error message that can be helpful for someone who's seeing the API definition. Another example, we have this quality assurance process in the community that I started back then. And the idea is to, okay, a PR has 2 approvals, right? Now let's test it. Let's have a person that is not the author of the pull request test, because they come with a fresh perspective and see if it's all working. So this is an example. The person, Fong, she wrote a test report that we have a template for to show, yeah, this is working as expected. Oh, I talked too much. So now I want to do a pause and I want you all, whoever wants to participate, to tell me the difference between these 2 messages. This is for me to breathe and for y'all to think a little bit. So there's some obvious differences. There's some not so obvious differences. Yeah, just let me know. You can say in the chat. Yes. Did you see any of my talks before? Okay, great. So the first option in the chat is, I guess, the correct one. So usually people may say, what I usually expect is people to say, I don't know, the hair, the skirt instead of the jeans. But I think Emily said new is willing herself. Exactly. So this is something that I wouldn't notice if I didn't read this blog post that I have the source here. And what I want to pass here is that people have different perspectives, and everyone has a place in open source, and you can bring your fresh perspectives to improve the open source world. Just remember that this is something that I don't think I would notice, but someone did, and just make the design better by giving their feedback. That's it. Thank you so much for the suggestions. Okay, so this is an example of, this is not code. This didn't even involve me touching GitHub or anything like that. I basically noticed that the projects from the organization were lacking topics. And I will show what topics are, but basically I created a spreadsheet and I added the topics that I thought were appropriate for each project. For example, Volunteers Android. It's a project that has Android, Java, mobile. Sisters GitHub.io. I knew it had HTML, CSS, and a few other tech stack. So I hand this over to the admins at the time, and they added to each project. So now when you go to the profile of the organization, each project has a topic. This can be helpful if you go to github/NETB-org. You'll see right away which projects are about Android, which projects are about Python. And this was a contribution because I was starting to be part of the community. I didn't have proper bandwidth to contribute in other ways, but I noticed this really low hanging fruit that I could help in. And I also did this. I created this Google Docs where I tried to come up with a consistent way of having our GitHub wiki sidebar so that each project would have a similar feel to it. And now I want to talk about motivations. I think motivation is super important to actually start contributing, right? Remember, I knew about open source already in 2016. I applied, I failed at being accepted, and then I didn't know what to do. My motivations initially was to create a portfolio, improve my technical skills. Over time, those motivations have changed. Now, I would really like to spread the word on open source and make sure that people use in the way, that they give back to the community, but it also contributes to them. So I'll talk about a few examples here. Create portfolio of work. What you do in open source is transparent. It's all public. So everyone will be able to see, your professional skills. What I mean by that, when you review a PR, you show how you review PRs. Are you nice when you give reviews? Uh, the communication when you're talking with new contributors, how do you help them reach to a better solution? The whole collaboration process is transparent, whether it's in closed communication channels like Zulip or Slack, or whether it's on GitHub comments or GitLab comments. And also you're showing your technical abilities. There's so much that it's visible from your contributions on to open source that you might not think about. It's not just the contribution, it's also the collaboration. A good description of a pull request. That's quite important. That helps a maintainer get an idea of what your PR is about. So again, this is one of the motivations that I even have today. Contribute back to the community. We depend so much on open source projects. We don't even know. There's some that they're not clear to us, that we're kind of using it. And there's other that we directly import in our code. So yeah, contributing back to the community. That's one of the reasons I try to become an admin at the community I'm now. I'm trying to give back, given that it was the place that I really started to learn about open source. And, I'm disseminating the knowledge because of my time there. You can volunteer for causes. So communities, like I mentioned before, like Ruby for Good, or other communities like Open Food Facts, which is an app that lists open food facts, and the data is crowdsourced.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can you repeat that? Volunteer for causes because I couldn't understand.
Yeah. So a community that I mentioned before, Ruby for Good, they have projects that they build for, they build for nonprofit organizations, or for example, the community I'm in, need to be open source. It's about helping accelerate women in tech careers. So it depends on each organization, but every organization has their missions, and yeah, that's what I mean by volunteering for causes. Can be social causes, can be an application that you use on your day-to-day, and you want to make it better. You may also want to improve your current skills or learn new ones. I've learned a lot from people with less work experience than me and with people with much more experience than me. I have learned a lot from the community itself, and so can you. And so I have this little thing here. If you're a career changer, for example, if you're doing a boot camp, if you come from a non-traditional background, if you're a self-taught programmer, contributing to open source can be a great way for you to build a portfolio and for you to show a potential employer, hey, I don't come from a traditional background, but I have here some contributions I've done. You can see how I collaborate, how I communicate with maintainers, how I fixed a few issues. I highly recommend this if you want to have a public portfolio of work, because when we work at a company, most of our work is proprietary, right? Nobody on the outside will know unless you tell them. And with open source, what you do is public, is transparent. Now I want to say a few things that can help if you're starting, or even if you're already in open source and maybe you're not aware of. Is the project active? So the project that I used to build the Google Summer of Code project is no longer active. The community forked that repo, which was Flask REST Plus. They forked the repo and they continued under another name, Flask REST X. And this is because the original project, the maintainer became unresponsive for a while. So they even created an issue on that deprecated project saying, hey, we moved to this other organization. So this is important, right? Because you want to try to contribute to a project that is active. You can also see if a project is archived. If it has a label archived, it's, don't even bother, unless you want to try a few things on your own fork. Are the maintainers responsive? This is quite important, and I have to say that sometimes I'm at fault at is. So remember that most maintainers do this on their volunteer time. So it's not like work where I may get people to review my work on the same day or the next day. In open source, I submitted once a pull request, I mean, more than once, and I got a response back or a merge 1 month later. Uh, this is normal. This will depend on each project. And I'll show you a few examples later, but this is something to be aware of. And maintainers not be responsive. Of course, it depends on how much time are they not being responsive. When I submit a pull request, I don't expect, oh, I will get a review tomorrow. I submitted, I did what I had to do. Perhaps I'll get back some comments and I'll have to change some things. Um, but again, I don't hold maintainers to, you have to respond within this certain time period. Again, this is kind of related to the time to get merged. It can take, if the maintainer reviews work, for example, weekly, or even if they review weekly, but they might prioritize work that is your contribution is not a part of, right? If they're prioritizing roadmap, perhaps your contribution, if it's not part of the roadmap, will be left a little bit on the side for higher priority items. Is the project community welcoming? This is kind of important. I actually, when I failed in 2016 to apply to GSOC, I applied with the need to be open source, called at the time Sisters Open Source. The second time, I applied again. And I was drawn to it just because I, I felt welcome there. Even though I didn't know what to do with open source there, I felt welcomed. I felt that I had a voice and I could have impact if I wanted to help, with good intentions. Does it match what you're looking for? So if you're thinking of having a portfolio with mainly JavaScript, then perhaps it doesn't make sense to contribute to Python projects, right? Uh, so yeah, I think it might seem obvious, but I just wanted to let this out. Do things transparently in public. So sometimes people who want to start with open source, they might send private messaging, for example, to me, or during Google Summer of Code, this happens a lot. Students, when they want to participate, when we had Slack, they would DM a lot, mentors and admins. But open source is supposed to be open, transparent. Collaboration is all about that. So for example, now that we are on Zulip, we have private messaging disabled so that everyone who has a question will ask publicly. And in that way, other people can benefit from that knowledge. And that's the spirit from open source. And also, uh, if you want to have your contributions public and you want to show to a potential employer, having conversations out in the open is the best approach to build your um, public portfolio. What is the process of contribution? So, for example, in our community, we have this rule of if your pull request is not linked to an issue, we would like you to create an issue first because we want to first validate the idea of, okay, this issue makes sense before having a contributor, air quote, waste their time in the contribution that we're not looking for. However, not all projects function like that. Not all communities function the same. And sometimes when I contribute to other projects, I read the process of contribution. There's nothing about creating an issue, and I just create a pull request because I see, okay, I can improve here. Code of conduct and reporting guidelines. This is very important because, and we want maintainers to hold this code of conduct, but not just maintainers, also the community around the project. So does the project have a code of conduct and reporting guidelines in case, for example, you get harassed or any violation of the code of conduct, and you can report to the community managers, right? So this is very important. It's a good thing to look for. Don't assume that all communities work the same. Uh, Code of conduct could be different, could have different guidelines. And again, communities may behave differently. And I will show a couple of contributions I've made and how they were different from each other. But I think I already gave you an idea that, in our community, we expect an issue before a PR. But in other communities or projects, they might not care if there's a prior issue. And I want to say that in terms of communication, projects also may have different communication platform, real-time platforms. We use Zulip now, but we use Slack before. There's communities that use Discord, mailing lists, and there's of course the comments under the issues or comments in a pull request. That's also communication. So now I want to show a couple of contributions just to get you an idea. Let me try to share this on the screen that has everything prepared. Okay, I hope this doesn't overwhelm anyone. I'm still on time. Okay, so let's see this one. I hope you're seeing my second screen. Can I get a yes? I'm showing a repository on GitHub.
Yes, we are seeing GitHub Anita B or GitHub IO.
Nice. Thank you so much. Okay, so I think I have to go backwards actually. Okay, I will do a contribution to this one. So hold on. But I want to show you, for example, I was super surprised the other day. I saw this PR and it was so well described. The contributor told us how she tested it, was super diligent with, the way she collaborated. She knew what to do. When the checks failed, okay, this is a count here, but she knew how to fix it. And I was kind of very surprised with this because I'm used to getting beginners, and that's totally okay. But this is just to show that we don't control the people we interact with on open source. I think that's an important point to say. And that's also how collaborating in open source can be so different from work, right? Because at work, the people you're contributing every day with. In open source, you don't know if you'll get a senior, a junior, someone who's experienced with open source, or someone who may be a senior but is not experienced with following the guidelines. And in this case, I got that. So she followed the pull request template. And I also want to show a test report that I did. The code review was done, and I deployed this to a specific URL. I tested and I said, all good, this makes sense. Okay, let's sorry, just so I can get, yeah. Another thing, this is a project that I knew that was made by a Portuguese woman. And so, the repository is called Portuguese Open Source Project. So I decided to add this. As simple as this was the contribution that I did. And now, people who will look at this, they will see, oh, this is a Portuguese project, cool. Another example, this is when I was randomly seeing this repository, don't ask me why, but I noticed that the link to the license was broken in the README. And this is this is sort of a corporate contribution. It's for a company called Elastic. And the interesting thing here is that I had to sign a contributor license agreement. You might find these with organizations that perhaps they have projects for profit, so they are a little bit more careful with the bureaucracy of open source, which again, I'm very, beginner at that. But it's just to tell you different types of process you may not expect and you may have to do. I had to sign this to say, all good, you can use this, code that I wrote. This is an issue that I just noticed. Oh, actually, there's Slack here, but I know there's a Slack for Sisters, and there was a Slack for Sisters open source. So I suggested, in this case, I suggested, hey, can we add Sisters open source mailing lists? And eventually, I also added Sisters open source Slack. And this was an issue that I created. It wasn't reported. Nobody was looking at it. And it was validated. And then I worked on it. And this was my contribution. So again, this is an example of an opportunity I created that didn't exist yet. I also like to give these examples. So this work was started by someone else, but because the contributor left the work, okay, this is the issue, where's the PR? Because I did give props here. So this was started by another contributor who eventually abandoned the issue. And this happens a lot in open source. If I could say something right now, I would say, if you commit to an issue and then you can work on it, please let the maintainers know so they can better manage the project. But in this case, I basically I noticed, oh, okay, so the only thing left here was a code review comment that wasn't addressed. So that's what I did. I used the same code and then I addressed the code review comment. Was approved, and then I had to show that it was working, and then a QA tester tested, and this was merged. And I wasn't very familiar with this project, but I still managed to contribute by continuing someone else's work. This is a funny one. I was looking into Women Who Code Cloud repository, and I noticed, oh, the link to the Slack is not working. And then I stalked a little bit, and I found out the real link, and voila, I just changed it. And this is one of those contributions that, I don't know when people will review this contribution done. And I think 4 days later, 4 or 5 days later, it was merged. So just so you see how, you can spot open source contributions you can make. You don't need to be attached to an organization to do them. Again, it will depend on the motivations you have. Okay. So now I want to do a little demonstration. I said a few concepts here, but I didn't quite explain, why am I saying fork? Why am I saying, so I will show you basically how to do a little contribution here. I will create a fork of a repository, which means create a copy to my account of a repository that I don't have direct access to. I will clone the repository, change files, commit and push, and create a pull request. Okay, I know that I don't have this project fork, so that's why I prepared this ahead of time. I will fork this to my account. So now instead of being on Anita B, I have a new copy on my project, on my account. And I noticed yesterday when I was searching for contributions that, this is wrong. So it's pointing to a channel that it's not called #design / team. It's actually just called design. So I actually could edit these here, but I just want to show what usually you would do if the contribution is a little bit more big than you expect. So let's just push these here. I will clone this repo into my local environment. Git clone. Oh, I already have. Okay, never mind. Let me remove this. Oh no. Okay, never mind. You know what? I will make a dir here called, go figure, test. Let's cd test. And now I will clone the repo and show you. So this is what you would usually do. I clone the repo, and now I will create a new branch because first I will go to the repo. And usually I create a new branch every time I want to do a contribution, because, if I want to contribute with many different tasks, it might be helpful to have different branches so I can, separate the work. Change Zulip, where am I writing? Change Zulip channel thing. Didn't need to be this big. Okay, and I'm doing mistakes right here. Okay, creating a branch. Yeah, and let's open these on Visual Studio Code, which open in the other screen, but it's fine. It's in the README. It's in the README, and it's down here. So yeah, it's not supposed to be -team. It's just supposed to be designed like this. This is the real name. So now I did my change, all good, all set. And again, I could have done this from GitHub interface, but when changes are bigger, usually this is what you have to do. And I will add this, I just change word file, all good. And change name of channel, done. Let's just push this. Okay, it's telling me to set the upstream, all good. This is because this branch doesn't exist yet on my fork, all good. And now what will happen is this exists. And this is already telling me create a pull request, but I will show you here in the interface. Okay, detected that I created this new branch. Let's create this pull request. Awesome. In this case, there's no issue. Well, my fault. What you're seeing here is a pull request template. We have, change name of Zulip channel. And I would basically fill out the rest, but because of time, I will just show you how I'm creating the pull request. So this is the change that I made. This is a pull request. It has a good title, has a sort of good description. Let's create this. And what will happen is, I don't know if you noticed, but base repository is Anita B's. Head repository is from my account. I hope I'm not breaking because I'm seeing this taking way too much time. Okay. This will create a pull request. Well, while it's being created, I'll show you in the end. I want to show a few other things. So as I told you, you can find, oh, it's created. Yeah, so this is a pull request I created. And now what would happen is a maintainer will look at this and will, probably approve, or if they don't approve, they will tell me what I have to change and we'll merge it. And I will show you right now me merging a PR because I approve. Okay, but before that, some tips and tricks. In terms of organizations, every year, about 200 organizations are accepted into Google Summer of Code. So if you're looking for, a community or organization that already might have a mission and a set of process that is the same for every project, you can find a lot of organizations here that are open source. Okay, a nice thing to know, if the original repository moves on and you're still working on your fork, it will get out of date and you might want to have the latest changes. So there's this little thing now on GitHub that will allow you to, sync your fork with the repository. This is quite a recent change that is quite really useful because before I would have to do some Git magic on my terminal. And I want to show you a PR that people from the community already approved, and I'm quite confident that this is working also because of the test that is there. Okay, so it was already approved. The code seems to make sense. So what I want to do here is, and you can see here that it works. So what I will do here is I will approve, not just approve, I will thank the contributor because, they're giving their time to contribute to these. I usually tag them because it's a personal thing. And I put a raised hands because, again, yeah, so I thank the contributor as a maintainer. And yeah, in this case, because I'm an admin, I can approve. We can set these approving reviews. In this case, it's 2, but usually, well, I just approve these. I usually squash and merge, and yeah, it's kind of a style, yeah, it's good. Right, this code will get merged and will soon be available on our little website that is in construction. And yes, that it's all right here. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, and I would like to tell you, if you already have some projects on GitHub, I did a presentation at Women Code Connect Reimagine about making the most of GitHub profile because, this is all correlated and I want you to take advantage of these things. Ellen, I'm throwing you the mic.
I'm throwing it back at you. Maybe people have questions that they would like to ask. I've been trying to answer them as they arrive, but I'm sure people have more. Or maybe you have something to add to whatever I have responded.
Okay, the question, I wasn't seeing. You might mention it at the beginning. Where can I find open source projects? I guess GitHub or specific websites to do pull requests. So a lot of things. Projects you already use. That's a good thing. So the Women Who Code Cloud PR that I did, I was looking through the repo and I noticed something could be improved. But I also mentioned, and I think Ellen also said this. I think it's explore. It's not explore. I know that I can search via by topic. Imagine if you want to contribute to something that has a topic of Python. Let's put here Python. Let's find Python projects here. Now, there's different types of projects out there. There's some very intimidating one. For example, TensorFlow. I'm not even going to look at it. I just want to let you know that you can find the smallest, the biggest projects you can find there. But this is a way for you to find projects that have the tag Python. This is a way to find them. And if you go to Google Summer of Code, again, you can find projects there. For example, a community, open food facts, GitHub. I got to know this community from Google Summer of Code because they were accepted at the year that I was also accepted. So that's a little trick for you to find projects. That's my answer. Okay, we have more questions? I see a lot of thank you, and thank you for the feedback. That's super important to me. And thank you for attending. How can you tell if a project is still active if the maintainers are responsive? There's some things that could be obvious indeed. So Flask, REST, plus, this is the example that I usually give. I want the GitHub. So for example, in this case, there's a very clear issue that says, this is that, long live the other framework. But one thing I would say, you can look at the last commit of the project. In this case, there's and the commit actually is to remove the license. So looking at the commit of a project can tell you, yeah, in this case, the real last commit, I guess, was in 2019. So it was 2 years ago. So probably the project is no longer maintained. And again, a lot of projects that have a big community will have an issue where they will let you know. They will let you know, like, this is not being maintained. Or sometimes somebody asks, is this project maintained? And then there's answers under that. So that's the tip to know if the project is active or not.
There also was a great question, but the person sent it to me privately. I'm going to read it. Their programming skills are very rusty, maybe over 10 years. Where do I start in open source? I'm quite busy at work and a baby, but I would like to start learning slowly.
Yeah.
So basically, how do you go very gently into it? How do you find the support?
How do you find the support? The first contribution I've made, let me see, hire.me. I always have this here. I went to 24 pull requests, which was a website where you could find projects that had that were open to contributing. I found this project there because I wasn't comfortable yet contributing with code, so I started with Markdown. So again, if you know the project, you can start looking at documentation. Try to see if there's something you can add to the documentation. Try to get familiarized, with the project's community, because this is like slowly. In the beginning, I did these little contributions, and then I went with my life, and only like 6 months later, I decided to apply to GSOC again. So you can always start small like this, like find contributions you can do just using text or fixing typos or writing tests. I love this type of contributions. Writing tests, right? Because the test, a code is never like 100% covered in terms of logic, right? So, and that's something that I usually have at the project. So if you know how to write that, I think this is a very small way you can contribute, and just increment more tests to a project you already have in mind. And with this, I think slowly but surely you'll feel comfortable with, okay, I spotted an opportunity to contribute. Can be code or not. Again, take a look at the issues. Often projects will have labels like first timers or good first issue. So I would say start small and then you'll feel more comfortable. That's how it happened with me. Hope that clarifies.
That's a great answer. There are 2 more questions in the chat.
I think that the other one is, what advice you would give to someone who wants to turn a personal project into public open source? Do you mean like a personal project that you want people to actually use? Because that's something I'm actually trying to figure out as well. Sometimes I look projects that I admire and I look at their licenses. I look at, okay, what is the automation that they have set up? What is the workflows on GitHub Actions or Travis CI that they have set up? So I would say automation is always important, right? So that when someone wants to contribute to your project, it runs a couple of checks before you even try to review the code. But there's a lot I could speak here. For example, are you talking about just having it public for people to contribute? Are you talking about, having a great README so, your personal project becomes open and recruiters can look at it? Do you want to attract contributors to the project? There's a lot of things I could answer here. I will answer the next question. If you could be more specific, let me know. Okay, how do you know if someone else is working on an issue? Great question. Well, either you see, so if a person, here's a tip, if a person links the issue, let's see this. If a person links the issue on the PR description, you'll see a PR open for it. It's here. The other thing is, for example, in our community, before someone contributes to an issue, we want them to claim it so we can assign it to them. But again, different communities behave in different ways. But there's a lot of clues you can see. Does it have a signage? Does it have an available label? Depending if the project you want to contribute to has that label. Did anyone claim it? Did any maintainer say, yes, this issue is yours? Do they have a PR created for it? You can also, if the PR isn't linked to the issue, you can always, because not everyone does that. If they're not familiar with this process of contributing, you may look for, I don't know, you're doing a PR about mail, something related to mail. You can search and see, is there any open PR regarding this issue? But usually the best thing is to look at the issue and see if there's any PR linked to it and if anyone is working on it. Again, it depends on the process of contribution for each project. Hope that answers. And about the other question, I wish I could be more helpful. Yeah, having good readmes is always a good option if you want people to contribute and learn. I'm not claiming here to have a good readme, but what matters in the end of the day is, can someone, without talking with maintainers, set up the whole project by themselves? That's a great thing to have in mind. And do you have like a description of the app that will have people want to contribute to the project? Okay, there's here a very good question. Do I need to open a PR for an issue I created? No, it depends. Do you want to contribute to that issue, or are you just reporting as a good open source citizen that wants to, hey, there's a bug in your app? You totally don't have to create a PR if you're not interested in contributing to that issue. Whatever reason that is, if you feel you're not comfortable contributing, or if you don't have time, reporting an issue is already an open source contribution. Okay, you're letting the maintainer know, hey, here's something that could be improved on your project. I hope that answers. The answer is no, you don't need to create a PR, a pull request for an issue that you create. You can just create and leave it to the community to handle if you want. Nice. Thank you for the questions. I feel that it really enhanced the presentation overall. I'll stop sharing. Wait, is there any other?
I have a feeling we are done with the questions. But I encourage you to join our Slack community where we continue the conversation. I'm also going to share the resources in a few days after the video is uploaded. Please follow us. Please stay tuned. Isabel is very active in our Slack workspace, so you can totally get in touch there. Thank you for joining.